next speaker is Kimberly Perry from New York Times. Hello, Kimberly. And she has founded and is leading the New York Times Digital Transition team. It was created in 2015 as a training team to bring digital skills and thinking to the core of the newsroom. And currently it's a 25 people person group providing strategy, training, and support non-stop. And the team's goal is to drive specific and tangible change. And how it's done, I assume Kimberly will be the best to tell it to you herself. So Kimberly, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm going to get right in. We're going to be talking about how the Times newsroom transitioned to a digital and more visual CMS and what we learned from scaling to our 1,700 person newsroom. Most of that work happened over the course of 2 years, so I'll really focus my attention there and what we learned along the way. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we're gonna jump right in. Our previous CMS was built around people's jobs. So digital producers worked in the production tab, editors worked in the article body, well, and reporters for the most part filed their stories through email, so they weren't even working in our previous CMS. As you can see, the tool was complicated and difficult to navigate. It didn't at all represent what our readers were seeing when they would click onto a story. The example here compares how you would add related links. These are links that are embedded in a story that take you to more coverage. This is just to give you an example of the difference. On the left is how you would add related links in the old system, and on the right is what it would look like in the new system. In the old system, you have to navigate through multiple tabs. You have to know where to go. You have to have previously searched an asset to know how to find it. But in Oak, which is the new system, it's very simple. You click on a plus sign. There's lots of content that you can add there. Everything is in one place, so you don't have to go to a new tab. This is just one example of how different the two systems are. Oak was designed to be more digitally oriented and represent what our readers were seeing when you were building your story. It was really meant to change how our journalists thought about and created their stories. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a high-level view of the rollout. So it really started with a small group of desks in 2017 that adopted the tool early and helped build out its functionality. These were definitely not our typical desks or our typical users. This would ultimately come to haunt us because this group was very selective and savvy, and it kind of gave us a false sense of confidence in the readiness of our CMS, which we discovered the next year when we brought the tool to more desks. So in 2018, we formally launched our onboarding. It became clear very quickly that the functionality was going to be a problem. The product and development teams hadn't worked closely enough with the newsroom to fully understand their workflow and how our journalism is made. So one quick example of that was basic editing functionality was insufficient. So as you're editing stories, typically there's going to be a lot of back and forth between a reporter and an editor, and then multiple layers of editing. So on our article pages, what that means is that you'll see kind of a sea of red and green. There'll be words striked out, there'll be other ones added, and it's actually very hard to read with that much editing. So one thing that we had in our previous system was the ability to accept all changes and really clear the page so you could do a fresh edit. Well, that wasn't available in the new system. So you can see our editors were pretty surprised, and also it didn't quite work with how our teams worked. So we started hearing from desks as we were doing this onboarding process that they were starting to edit their stories in Google Docs and then copying them over into our new Oak system because that's what they were going to make them look good. I mean, in fact, this wasn't wrong. The tool was meant to put design tools in reporters and editors' hands, but it was also meant to change how we made our journalism. And we needed it to be a collaborative tool, and we wanted people to be working in the tool. So as we were doing this onboarding, it became clear that the tool really wasn't built with newsroom users in mind. The teams had really only tested and modeled after edge cases. So we ended up pausing for a year, and the product team revamped and they took a step back and came back in 2019 to really iterate on a tool that was much more improved. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about how this disconnect happened. Product built the tool with the idea that one person made a story that just isn't how it works in our newsroom. We have reporters, we have editors, we have photo editors, we have masthead editors. It's a team that needs different levels of access and different functionality. And they also contribute in different places in the workflow. So for example, when a photo would get wiped out every time an editor did a write through of a story, which can happen quite often on a story that's updating and moving and live. So the editor workflow wasn't considered when we created the tool. There was a wealth of knowledge and expertise in our newsroom that could have been mined. And for all the issues with our previous CMS, there were things that were absolutely worth keeping. I think that this ultimately cost us some time and some trust in the newsroom. We needed to get people to use the CMS. We needed to see them to see it as an improvement and want to be in this new system. That was really the digital momentum that's going to create the change that we were looking for. But we couldn't get there if people felt like they were fighting the tool and it wasn't working in service of our journalism. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the scaling that happened in 2019 with the major news desks. This was probably 70% of our report and the majority of the people in the newsroom. So like I said, we had taken a pause, we had come back in 2019, the tool had improved, but we weren't really sure that it had improved enough. So what we decided to do is take an iterative approach and testing and onboarding and improving as we were doing the onboarding for desks. So we ended up testing breaking news with Metro so that we knew by the time we got to the rest of the newsroom that functionality was really working. So every time we would add a desk, we would be able to improve the tool. So we were also able to address functionality issues that were priorities for each desk as part of the onboarding. Ultimately, desks would prioritize different things based on what their needs were. So some things were left undone, but desks were able to help to shape the tool itself, which I think went a long way to building trust in the new CMS. So for example, our Washington bureau is always filing on every deadline. And they were really interested in having more integration with print and understanding what the transparency in their system was. So we added, that for them before we did our onboarding. But, one other thing that we didn't get to for, probably 6 or 9 months was the ability to automatically add contributor bylines. So people actually had to type those in manually, which is not a good idea. We don't want people having to remember how to spell people's names. So keep in mind that as we were doing this and the tool is improving and desks are onboarding to something that is the workflow is very new, it's collaborative. We're also teaching people new skills. So they're learning how to think about font sizes and page design. Essentially, it was a lot. We were kind of throwing a lot at people. So let's move to the next slide and I can talk you through what the training itself looked like. So we moved pretty quickly, I would say, at least in this last phase of the onboarding, which thankfully, because this year COVID hit, and I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have everyone working on the same system, because for a while we had two different systems operating. But just a couple of highlights in terms of how we tackled the training itself. So we did a lot of pre-training ahead of onboarding people to the new system, mainly because we needed people to be really comfortable with technology and computer skills. Oak is much more sophisticated, and if you don't kind of understand how to work with your computer and have comfort with your computer, it's going to make that training a lot harder. So every single person in our newsroom on the news desks received that kind of training ahead of time. All of our technical training was one-on-one over the course of 4 weeks. So we had some people who we would spend an hour with, some people we'd spend 4 hours with. We really devoted time to making sure people were comfortable and knew how to work in the tool. We also did group sessions around new skill building with visual training and critiques, and we continued to kind of come back to how people were using full headers on their page or subheads, things like that. And then once the training team moved off of a desk, we would have our support team move in, and they would become the primary day-to-day support so that our training team could move on to the next desk. There were times at which we were overlapping desks, so we were doing multiple desks at a time. And then we also did lots of follow-up training for desks because the tool was changing as we were onboarding, which meant that we had a lot of we had a lot of desks that had been trained in one version that we needed to catch up to other versions. So that's mostly the way that it worked, and I'm happy to take questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kim, very much. My first question is immediately, what was the response from journalists and editorial team when you approached them? How easy or hard it was to convince them to implement all your suggestions?
So I think well, when the tool was not working with them and they felt like they were fighting it, it was not good. We had a desk actually revolt and decide that they weren't going to use it, which was part of the reason that we really stopped and rethought what the tool looked like. But I think there were ultimately we were able to sell it because there were a lot of advantages. There was a lot more flexibility. It was very collaborative, so multiple people could be in a story at once, and it made them really fast. And one of the things that, as most of you know, journalists are very competitive. And so what we could do is add that benefit to using this new system. It was much easier, it was much faster. And so once we got past the hurdle of like the tool not quite being right or ready, and we were able to make specific improvements that they were interested in, adoption was a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. So I want to understand how much one journalist is responsible or able to affect what will go out on social media regarding his story, headline, because it's still like there are many people working on the same story, as a visual editor and whatever, how much a journalist can affect it.
So the nice thing about the tool itself is that everything is in one page. So when you're writing your story, it's very natural to create a headline, to create a summary, to add all of that stuff. So because it feels seamless, it feels like that is like the experience that you're going to be giving to your readers. So our reporters we encourage them to suggest headlines, but it is often the editors who are doing that. So, and it's their assignment editor. That's the person who's writing that stuff and like really building out the full page. So there's quite a bit of autonomy on the desks to do that work.
Mm-hmm. How much journalist sees the outcome, like how well read is the story, and do you have some mechanisms how to correlate it with journalists? You didn't hear maybe previous presentations. This is what we were talking actually, how to inform journalists about how many people are buying or new subscriptions come in. How do you correlate these issues?
Yeah, so our journalists have access to all kinds of article page data, so they can see how many subscribers have looked at their story. They can see where they come from. They can see where things have been shared. They can see page views. We launched that, I think maybe 5 years ago. I mean, the problem with it is that it's only article by article, so it doesn't give you a full picture or context as to who's looking at a body of work, which I think would be really helpful, because when you're looking at an individual moment in time, it's like only part of the story. So we're pretty comfortable with our journalists seeing data. We did when we talk about goals, though, we don't talk about number goals. We talk about our journalism. We talk about doing big investigative stories. We talk about breaking news and being fast. We talk about sharing with our community, because we know that when we talk about journalism, it really resonates with our newsroom and it leads to growth. We do not talk about our subscribers, because I think correlating like a subscriber path to individual stories is very hard. And so we tend to focus more on just making really amazing journalism that we know people want.
So it means that for your journalist, salary doesn't correlate how much he maybe will receive as a bonus, because I know some American media newsrooms, it correlates, like if your article was read like this and that specific time amount, because it means that the person spent more time on your platform and they were able to show more ads. It also correlates to salary. For New York Times, it doesn't work like that.
Oh my gosh, no. I mean, we also have it's a very big newsroom, and we have some people who, devote, a year to one story. Although we hope that story is very, very good. We wouldn't correlate those things, no.
Okay. Then we have a question from Ricardus. How can you compare Oak with existing well-known CMS in the market? ARC, ARC, for example, is available for others or just for internal usage?
It's for internal uses. It's proprietary. I've never seen ARC, so I've heard about it. I heard it's a good system and people like working in it. I mean, I think of like the WordPress and other ones that I've seen. It is kind of similar in that the ease of use and having like your story built within one page is very similar. So I do think like the Times is a big place. And when we first launched the idea of it was 5 years ago, and it took us 5 years to build it and to launch it. And so I think in that time and then it took us 3 years to literally get everyone on board. So I think in a lot of other newsrooms where it's smaller and you are using off the shelf tools, you maybe have like your CMS might look a little bit better before ours did.
But as far as I know, for example, Washington Post, they're also selling these platforms.
They are, yeah, they are.
It's actually a big chunk of their revenue. So you haven't thought about it, like New York Times, to sell yours?
So that has not been put on the table. I think they're really just trying to build a system that that still just works for the newsroom, and that is that's a complicated enough problem to solve.
Is there something where you kind of failed? It didn't work out. You were planning that it will happen, but it didn't work out.
In terms of the building the CMS?
No, not even so much a technical point, but like maybe you were hoping, okay, journalists or editors will do this collaboration and they will do something, but it actually didn't work out because I don't know, mentality or how people see their stories or something. Can you recall something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had hoped that people would more naturally gravitate towards digital story forms, and that didn't happen. It didn't. The article, the kind of traditional New York Times article, the inverted pyramid, the one that we're also familiar with, is very ingrained in the culture. And I think what we were hoping is that by making story forms much more easily accessible, that it would naturally just become a part of how people made their journalism. And we definitely do a lot more of those things, and those things are commissioned. But, probably 70% of the report are still, traditional article pages. So I think that is something that we still have to work on. And certainly like this tool is going to help us to get there. But the tool itself did not change the culture, at least in that part. I mean, it did help us to like be much more collaborative because the tool, multiple people can work on it at once. And so that was a big cultural change. But we're not quite there in terms of, more digitally native story forms.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today and for this excellent presentation. So thanks.
Thank you.